It started like any other Queen night, electric, loud, unstoppable. Freddie Mercury walked onto that stage and the entire arena erupted as if the building itself had learned to breathe for him. The lights hit his face, the microphone warmed in his hand, and for a moment, everything felt invincible. Until it didn't. Halfway through the show, something happened that Freddie never planned for, something that terrified him more than a wrong note, more than a bad review, more than any headline he'd ever survived. His voice began to vanish. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But in a way that felt worse, slow, public, unavoidable. And then came the moment that broke him. The crowd realized what was happening, and they started singing the song for him. Tens of thousands of voices rose in the place where Freddie should have been. To the audience, it felt like magic. To Freddie, it felt like his identity slipping through his fingers. What did he do in that instant? Who noticed first? And what happened after the lights went down, when Freddie had no stage left to hide behind? Keep watching. And if you want the raw, intimate Queen stories that feel like real life, not legend, subscribe now. Because the nights the world didn't understand, reveal the truth. Freddie knew his voice the way a pilot knows turbulence. He could sense changes before anyone else heard them, dry air, fatigue, a throat that felt tight after too many nights of pushing. Normally, it was manageable. He would adjust, pace, charm the crowd into carrying the heavy parts. He was a master of illusion. But on this night, the illusion fought back. Backstage, he warmed up like always, small hums, quick scales under his breath, the kind of routine muscle memory that made his confidence feel real. He joked with the crew, teased Roger, slapped Brian lightly on the shoulder like a man who had never doubted himself a day in his life. Still, something felt off. Not pain exactly. Not sickness. Just a strange thinness in the air when he tried to push a note. He ignored it. Freddie Mercury had built his life on ignoring warnings. The show began with the usual explosion. The arena swallowed sound and threw it back louder. Freddie walked into the lights with that familiar swagger, chest lifted, eyes sharp, mustache perfect, like the world belonged to him. For the first few songs, he was fine. Not flawless, human, but fine. Then, somewhere between the heat of the lights and the strain of the set, it happened. He reached for a higher phrase and felt his throat resist. The note didn't soar. It scraped. The sound that came out wasn't wrong enough for the crowd to notice immediately. But Freddie noticed. His eyes narrowed for half a second. He tightened his grip on the microphone. The band kept playing, unaware, the groove steady, the machine still running. Freddie leaned into the next line, trying to force the voice into obedience. It answered with a faint crack. A tiny fracture in the middle of a word. The crowd cheered anyway, because they heard Freddie Mercury, and to them that name was louder than any flaw. They didn't know what that crack meant. Freddie did. It wasn't just a bad note. It was a warning that something deeper was failing, something he couldn't control with attitude. He shifted instantly into strategy. He spoke more between lines, turning vocals into showmanship. He made the crowd clap, sing, shout. He moved constantly, avoiding long-held notes. He let Brian's guitar carry transitions longer than usual, leaned into Roger's drum breaks, used John's steady bass like a cushion beneath him. From the outside, it looked like an unusually interactive Freddie, generous, playful, electric. Inside, it felt like panic dressed up as charisma. He tried again on the next chorus, aiming for power. The note broke harder this time. Freddie smiled wide, too wide, and turned the microphone toward the audience. Sing it, he demanded. The arena roared back, thousands of voices flooding the gap. It was loud enough to hide the crack completely. To anyone watching, it looked like Freddie had orchestrated the moment on purpose. Only the band began to sense it. Brian's head turned slightly, eyes narrowing. He watched Freddie's mouth, the way Freddie started timing his breaths differently. Roger glanced up between hits, reading Freddie's movement. John, quiet as ever, didn't look away for long. Freddie caught their attention and gave them what he always gave when he didn't want questions. A grin. A wink. A bigger performance. But the fear was growing now. Because the crack wasn't going away. It was spreading. Freddie felt dryness intensify, like his throat was turning to sand. He swallowed between lines and felt no relief. He drank water and it only made him more aware of how fragile everything had become. A few people in the front rows started to notice something, tiny shifts in expression, a whisper exchanged, curiosity flickering. Freddie saw it and felt his stomach drop. They're noticing. He leaned into the mic again, trying to push through. The voice came out, but weaker. Thin. The sound of a flame struggling to stay lit. His chest tightened with something close to grief. Because Freddie didn't just sing. His voice was his proof of existence. His weapon. His identity. His shield. If it failed on stage, in front of thousands, it wouldn't just be embarrassing. It would be exposure. He moved closer to the edge of the stage, forcing energy into his body. He clapped, shouted, demanded more noise, more participation. He turned the audience into a choir to cover what he couldn't deliver. And the crowd loved it. They didn't understand they were being asked to save him. But Freddie began to realize, slowly, painfully, that the night might not end the way it always did. Because if his voice continued to fade, eventually there would be a moment when even the crowd couldn't hide it. And Freddie would have to face the one thing he feared most. A stage where he could no longer be Freddie Mercury. Freddie had built entire stadiums around his voice. Not the other way around. That truth hit him with brutal clarity as the song moved forward and his throat refused to follow. He could feel the sound thinning before it even reached the microphone, like air escaping through a crack he couldn't seal. He tried again. The note came out, but softer, fragile, stripped of the authority that usually made the crowd submit to him instinctively. The lights were blinding now. The heat pressed down on his chest. Sweat ran along his spine, but his hands felt cold. And then it happened. Someone in the crowd sang louder. Not on purpose. Not as a gesture. Just instinct. A woman near the front filled the gap where Freddie's voice should have been. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was confident. Clear. And once it was there, it couldn't be unheard. Another voice joined. Then another. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, rows, sections, entire sides of the arena rising together. The melody swelled outward, no longer waiting for Freddie to lead it. The crowd was singing. For him. The noise was enormous. Deafening. From the outside, it felt euphoric, thousands of people unified, carrying the song as one. A moment audiences would later describe as magical, unforgettable, transcendent. Freddie stood there and felt something inside him cave in. He lowered the microphone slowly, almost without realizing he was doing it. The sound around him grew louder as his contribution disappeared. The crowd didn't notice the transition. They were too immersed in the moment. Brian's fingers froze for half a beat on the fretboard. Roger stared. John stopped moving entirely. Freddie Mercury, who had always commanded voices, was suddenly unnecessary. The applause roared between lines, not waiting for him, not responding to him, just existing on its own. Freddie smiled automatically, nodding along, encouraging them with his hand like a conductor who had lost control of the orchestra. But inside, panic spread. They don't need me. That thought landed hard and ugly, far more painful than the fear of sounding bad. Freddie had always believed that even if everything else was taken away, the press, the image, the excess, his voice would remain. It was the one thing that could not betray him. And now it was. He tried to sing again, quietly, testing the waters beneath the roar of the crowd. The sound barely made it past his lips. His throat burned. His chest tightened with a strange pressure that had nothing to do with breath. He swallowed and tasted nothing. Not even air. Freddie laughed softly into the microphone, masking the silence. "You sound beautiful tonight," he told them. The audience erupted, proud, louder than ever. Brian stepped closer, voice low under the music. "Do you want me to take it?" Freddie shook his head quickly. "No. Not yet." Roger leaned forward over the kit. "Freddie." Freddie raised a hand. He wasn't ready to admit it. Not to them. Not to himself. He turned back to the crowd, lifting both arms now, fully surrendering the song to them. Tens of thousands of voices rose higher, stronger, filling every space Freddie's voice had once occupied. From the outside, it looked generous. From the inside, it felt like erasure. Freddie scanned the faces in the front rows, joy, tears, awe. People were holding each other, singing with closed eyes, convinced they were part of something rare. And they were. They just didn't know what it cost. Freddie felt small in that moment. Not physically, emotionally. Reduced to a gesture, a symbol, a man waving while others did the thing that had once defined him. The song ended in thunderous applause. Freddie clapped along, smiling, bowing slightly. The noise was so loud it swallowed everything else. Except the truth. As the next song began, Freddie stepped back instead of forward. He let Brian take the center for a moment. He paced more slowly now, careful, conserving what little voice remained. Roger watched him closely, jaw tight. John didn't look away. Freddie felt exposed in a way he never had before. Not because the crowd saw his weakness. But because they didn't. They were celebrating something he hadn't chosen. They were praising a moment that, for Freddie, felt like losing a limb in public. For the rest of the set, Freddie adjusted completely. He spoke more. Sang less. Let the crowd fill gaps again and again. Each time they did, the cheers grew louder. And each time, something inside Freddie pulled further away. Because applause didn't sound like love anymore. It sounded like replacement. And somewhere between the lights and the noise, Freddie Mercury realized the terrifying possibility he'd never allowed himself to consider. That one day, the show might go on. Even without his voice. From where the crowd stood, everything still looked perfect. The lights were sharp. The sound was massive. Freddie Mercury was still moving, still smiling, still commanding attention with the smallest lift of his hand. To the audience, this felt like one of those rare nights where magic simply happened on its own. But on stage, the truth was much closer, and much darker. Brian May had been playing beside Freddie for years. He knew the man's timing the way you know your own pulse. He knew when Freddie was about to jump, when he would tease a note, when he would let silence stretch just long enough to make the crowd ache for more. And now, none of that rhythm was there. Freddie was reacting instead of leading. Brian noticed how Freddie waited for the crowd before committing to a line. How he angled the microphone outward sooner than usual. How he leaned into movement to disguise the absence of sound. This wasn't showmanship. This was compensation. Roger felt it too, pounding the drums harder than planned, filling space that shouldn't have needed filling. He kept his eyes locked on Freddie between beats, searching for cues that never came. John, quiet and steady, sensed the shift immediately. He stayed anchored, simplifying his lines, grounding the music in case everything else collapsed. John had always been the safety net, and tonight, he tightened it without anyone asking. Between songs, Brian leaned in. "You don't sound right," he said quietly, keeping his mouth close to the microphone so the crowd wouldn't hear. Freddie grinned. "I sound fantastic." But his eyes gave him away. There was fear there. Not panic. Not hysteria. Fear, controlled, intelligent, and deeply personal. Roger moved closer during a drum break. Is it your throat? Freddie didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. The band adjusted instinctively, the way musicians do when something goes wrong mid-flight. They shortened songs. Shifted keys slightly. Extended instrumental sections. Anything to reduce strain without making it obvious. Freddie noticed every adjustment. And each one cut deeper. Because he knew what it meant, they were protecting him. And Freddie Mercury had never needed protection on stage before. As the set continued, Freddie grew quieter, not just vocally, but emotionally. He laughed less between songs. He stopped improvising. The flamboyance that usually poured out of him like instinct now felt measured, almost cautious. Brian watched him and felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't just a bad night. This was Freddie confronting a limit he'd never acknowledged. Roger leaned back during a break, voice tight. Do we stop? Freddie shook his head immediately. No. Roger pressed. Freddie. I said no, Freddie snapped, sharper than he intended. The crowd cheered, mistaking the tension for drama. Brian stepped in, calm. We'll get you through it. Freddie swallowed hard and nodded. But what scared Brian most wasn't the voice. It was the look in Freddie's eyes, the way he avoided meeting their gaze for too long, as if afraid they'd see something he wasn't ready to name. He wasn't afraid of the audience. He was afraid of being witnessed by the people who knew him best. As the crowd sang again, louder this time, Brian felt a chill run through him. He watched Freddie stand still, microphone lowered, letting the sound wash over him. Freddie Mercury had always been the storm. Now, he was standing inside one. Roger's drumming softened slightly, instinctively holding space. John stayed steady, eyes never leaving Freddie's posture, his breathing, the subtle signs that something inside him was unraveling. Between one song and the next, Freddie turned his back to the audience for just a second longer than usual. Brian caught a glimpse of his reflection in the stage monitor. Freddie's smile had dropped. What replaced it wasn't anger or frustration. It was grief. Brian felt it settle in his stomach like a weight. This wasn't about losing a voice for one night. This was about identity. Because Freddie Mercury didn't just sing. He was his voice. And watching him struggle felt like watching someone lose language mid-sentence. The band closed ranks tighter now, not physically, but musically, emotionally. They followed Freddie instead of being led by him. They watched him breathe. Watched his cues. Watched for signs of collapse. The crowd remained oblivious. They cheered louder with every shared chorus, convinced they were part of something beautiful. But Brian, Roger, and John understood something the audience didn't. This wasn't a magical moment. It was a warning. And the most frightening part wasn't that Freddie's voice was fading. It was that Freddie himself didn't know what he would be without it. The lights didn't fade gently. They cut. 1 second the arena was roaring, vibrating with applause and chants for more. The next, darkness swallowed the stage, and the sound collapsed into a distant echo behind thick curtains. That was when Freddie felt it. Not the loss of voice. The loss of armor. The adrenaline drained out of him so fast it made his knees feel weak. His throat burned now, raw and empty, like something had been scraped clean and left exposed. He swallowed instinctively and felt nothing answer back. No strength. No sound. Just silence. Freddie turned away from the crowd and walked off stage without his usual flourish. No spinning bow. No dramatic gesture. Just a straight line toward the shadows, shoulders tense, jaw locked. Brian was at his side immediately. Easy, Brian said quietly, hand hovering near Freddie's back in case he stumbled. Freddie waved him off. I'm fine. The words came out rough. Thin. Almost unrecognizable. Roger noticed. His face tightened. Backstage was chaos, crew shouting, cases rolling, sweat-soaked bodies moving fast. But Freddie felt detached from all of it, like he was walking through water. The noise blurred. The lights hurt his eyes. Mary was waiting near the dressing room. She took one look at Freddie's face and knew. "You pushed too hard," she said softly. Freddie didn't respond. Inside the dressing room, the door closed, and the noise of the world dropped away. Freddie leaned both hands against the counter, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His face looked wrong. Not because of age. Not because of exhaustion. Because the confidence wasn't there. He opened his mouth and tried to hum, just a test, something small. Nothing came out. Not even a whisper. His chest tightened. For the first time that night, real fear surfaced. Not abstract. Not hypothetical. Immediate. Brian stepped closer. "Don't force it." Freddie laughed weakly. "Bit late for that." Roger crossed his arms, frustration and fear mixing. "You should have stopped when it started." Freddie snapped back, sharper now. "And say what?" "Sorry, darlings, Freddie Mercury's voice has gone on holiday." The room went quiet. John spoke carefully. "You didn't fail out there." Freddie turned toward him, eyes sharp. "Yes, I did." "No," John said calmly. "You adapted." Freddie shook his head. "I disappeared." That was the truth he couldn't avoid anymore. He sat down heavily in the chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The room felt too small now. Too honest. "They sang for me," Freddie said quietly. Mary stepped closer. "They sang with you." Freddie looked up at her. "No. They sang instead of me." No one argued. Because they all knew what he meant. Brian sat down across from him. It was one night. Freddie met his eyes. And what if it's the first? The question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. Freddie had lived his entire life believing that as long as he could step on a stage and open his mouth, everything else could be managed. The voice had been his constant. His proof. And now it had betrayed him in the one place he felt most alive. Roger exhaled slowly. "We'll get it checked. Doctors. Rest." Freddie nodded, but his eyes drifted back to the mirror. He looked smaller there. Not weaker, uncertain. That scared him more than pain ever could. "I don't know who I am without it," Freddie said, almost to himself. Brian leaned forward. "You're Freddie Mercury." Freddie smiled faintly. "That's the problem." Because Freddie Mercury was the voice. The command. The sound that made thousands obey. And tonight, for the first time, that identity had cracked in public. Mary placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to decide anything tonight." Freddie closed his eyes and nodded. But even as he sat there, breathing slowly, trying to calm the tightness in his chest, he knew something irreversible had happened. The stage had taken something from him. Or worse, shown him something he'd never wanted to see. That his greatest strength was also his most terrifying vulnerability. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The fear didn't fade with distance. It didn't stay backstage, or dissolve under city lights, or get left behind in the echo of applause. Freddie carried it with him, quietly, invisibly, long after the show ended. That night, Garden Lodge felt different. Too large. Too still. The familiar comfort of the house offered no relief. Freddie moved through the room slowly, touching nothing, as if afraid of disturbing something fragile inside himself. He set his jacket down carefully. Placed his keys exactly where they always went. Small rituals, desperately controlled. Mary watched him from the doorway. "You should rest," she said gently. Freddie nodded, but didn't move. Rest felt dangerous. Because rest meant silence. And silence meant listening. He poured himself a drink, not to escape, but to steady his hands. His throat still burned, raw and empty. He cleared it instinctively, then stopped himself. No tests. No proof. He sat down at the piano and rested his fingers on the keys without pressing them. For years, music had poured out of him even when he didn't ask for it. Melodies arrived uninvited. Lyrics formed themselves. Tonight, there was nothing. The absence felt louder than sound. Freddie leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. His chest tightened as a question surfaced, one he had never allowed himself to fully articulate before. What if this happens again? Worse. What if it doesn't go away? The thought lodged itself deep, refusing to be dismissed. Freddie had faced criticism, scandals, loss, rejection. He had survived being misunderstood by the world. But this was different. This wasn't something he could fight with confidence. It wasn't something he could outshine. This was his body drawing a line. Mary sat beside him, close but not intrusive. She had learned long ago when to speak and when to let silence do its work. "You didn't disappoint anyone," she said quietly. Freddie exhaled through his nose. "I disappointed myself." That was the truth. Because Freddie had always believed that no matter how chaotic his life became, the stage would remain his sanctuary. That the voice would show up even when he felt fractured. Tonight proved that nothing was guaranteed. He walked into the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror again, this time without the bright lights, without adrenaline. He looked tired. Older than he felt. Human. He opened his mouth and tried to sing, softly, cautiously. Nothing. Not even a whisper. His hand gripped the edge of the sink. Fear surged, not dramatic, not explosive, but quiet and suffocating. For the first time, Freddie Mercury felt truly vulnerable in a way applause couldn't mask. He wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of losing the one thing that had always carried him forward. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the crowd singing without him. Heard their voices filling the space where his should have been. Felt the moment replay itself, sharper each time. He wondered how many nights like this would follow. Whether the voice would return fully, or whether this was the beginning of a slow retreat. Freddie lay awake until morning, listening to the quiet, learning something deeply uncomfortable. That fear doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply moves in. And stays. There was something Freddie never said out loud. Not to the band. Not to Mary. Not even to himself, at least, not in words. It lived in the space between breaths, in the way his chest tightened when the house grew quiet, in the hesitation that now preceded every vocal warm-up. It followed him through rooms, through rehearsals, through moments that should have felt normal again. The fear didn't shout. It waited. In the days that followed the show, Freddie moved carefully. He rested his voice. Cancelled unnecessary conversations. Spoke less, listened more. When he did test his voice, it came back, not broken, not gone, but changed. More fragile. More demanding. And that terrified him. Because it meant his voice was no longer something he could take for granted. It required respect now. Boundaries. Care. Freddie had never been good with limits. He had always believed that if you pushed hard enough, brilliance would answer. That exhaustion was just another obstacle to dominate. That giving everything was the same as being alive. Now, the body that had carried him through decades of excess was asking something different. It was asking him to slow down. Freddie didn't say it out loud, but he understood what was happening. He wasn't afraid of losing his voice forever. He was afraid of discovering who he would be if it stopped defining him. That truth settled slowly, painfully. Because Freddie Mercury had built a persona larger than life, flamboyant, commanding, untouchable. The voice was the spine of that image. Without it, he felt exposed in a way no headline or scandal had ever achieved. One afternoon, sitting alone at the piano, Freddie pressed a single key. The sound filled the room gently. He didn't sing. He just listened. And something shifted. He realized that the moment on stage, the one that had felt like erasure, hadn't actually taken anything from him. It had revealed something. The crowd hadn't replaced him. They had held space for him. But Freddie hadn't been ready to see it that way. Because accepting that meant accepting vulnerability, something he had always hidden behind volume, wit, and spectacle. He thought about the way Brian had watched him that night. The way Roger had leaned forward, alert. The way John had stayed steady, grounding everything without drawing attention to himself. They hadn't seen a failure. They had seen a man they cared about. That realization softened something in Freddie. He stopped trying to outrun the fear. Instead, he began to walk beside it. Freddie never gave a speech about that night. Never addressed it publicly. Never turned it into a story to be told. But it changed him. Subtly. He listened to his body more. Chose moments of silence intentionally. Let songs breathe instead of forcing them. He still commanded stages, that never disappeared, but he no longer believed control was the same as strength. And deep down, there was one truth he finally allowed himself to feel. That being needed was not the same as being loved. And that love didn't vanish the moment his voice faltered. The thing Freddie never said out loud was simple, and terrifying. He was afraid. Not of the crowd. Not of critics. But of being ordinary without the thing that made him extraordinary. And in facing that fear, he learned something that applause could never teach him. That his worth was never just in the sound he made. But in the courage it took to stand on stage, vulnerable, and remain there even when the voice didn't answer the way it used to. The night Freddie heard the crowd sing without him didn't end his power. It quietly redefined it. And that understanding stayed with him, long after the lights went down.